What is Read Across America? Well, it's the nation's biggest celebration of reading. And the reason I'm holding up Cat in the Hat is, as you probably know, many of you know, it's celebrated on Dr. Seuss's birthday, or around there. Okay. It's in its 7th year, and its goal is to motivate children to read, to increase mastery of basic skills, and I guess one question is, how did it start? And according to what I read on the internet, a bunch of reading specialists were sitting around and saying, people always celebrate football teams, and they even celebrate character counts. Why not celebrate reading? So today's the day. And what's happening around the country today? You know? This is going on all across the country. Well, I'm going to tell you. In Norfolk, Virginia, they're rechristening an amphibious assault ship, the Nassau, as the Reader Ship. In Philadelphia, the Philadelphia Eagles will read the Constitution. In Salt Lake City, well, let me ask you a Jeopardy question. What's the question to which this is an answer? Let me make sure I got the question and the answer right. Hold on a second here. I think this is the answer. I don't know. Who will be hosting a Seuss trivia competition generated by the Utah National Education Association? And the question is, that was the answer, right? Anybody know the question? What will Jeopardy millionaire Kenneth Jennings be doing to help celebrate NEA's Read Across America? And in Nashville, Dolly Parton will be singing a little Dr. Seuss. Okay? But what's going to be happening here this evening? Well, let me just start by saying a little bit about who I am, and then I'll introduce the rest of the panel. I'm Bob Selman, as I said before, and I'm a researcher and a practitioner who studies the development of children's social awareness, and that study has led me into the land of literacy. And so I'm going to be sharing with you one of the books that I've discovered in the land of literacy that I am very fond of, that speaks to also the issues of social awareness and social justice. But first I want to introduce the panel. On my left, my first left, is my colleague, Catherine Snow. She's an expert on language and literacy, and particularly on how oral language skills are acquired and how they relate to literacy outcomes. She's chaired a number of national panels on topics of literacy, including one such as the prevention of reading difficulties in children. She has a recently published book called Preparing Our Teachers, Opportunities for Better Reading Instruction, which is one of several efforts she's involved in to develop consensus among teacher educators about what pre- and in-service elementary teachers need to know about language and literacy. And currently, she is involved in a collaborative with a number of other Boston area researchers and the BPS to try to improve adolescent literacy. I don't know if adolescent literacy is an oxymoron. And to her left is Lisa Von Vleck, and Lisa received her MAT from the Harvard Graduate School of Education several years ago, and soon after that joined the Peace Corps to teach future teachers of English at the Universidad del Norte in Antofagasta, Chile. And when she returned from the Peace Corps, she taught ESL in the early years of the Spanish bilingual programs in Cambridge. And I should also mention that Catherine has been very involved in issues of bilingualism as well. Lisa began her career in volunteer administration with the Travelers Aid Family Services of Boston, where she was the director of volunteer services for 6 years before returning to education as a field. And she's been the director of corporate programs at the Cambridge School Volunteers for almost 20 years. The program has grown steadily and surely over that time, from 3 corporate sponsors to now up to 11 or 12. And she's currently responsible for over 300 volunteers, including the Harvard Graduate School of Education volunteers in the Reading Buddies program. Okay? So now I get to read to you. Let me see if I can do this right. Okay. So if we can turn the lights down. I've selected, the book that I've selected to read to you is called Freedom Summer. Do any of you know it? Fantastic. All right. All right. John Henry Waddell is my best friend. His mama works for my mama. Her name is Annie Mae. Early morning at 8 o'clock, Annie Mae steps off the county bus and walks up the long hill to my house. If it's summer, John Henry is stepping it right beside her. Okay. We like to help Annie Mae. We shell butter beans, we sweep the front porch, we let the cats in, then chase the cats out of the house until Annie Mae says, "Shoo, enough of you two, go play." We shoot marbles in the dirt until we're too hot to be alive. Then we yell, "Last one in is a rotten egg," and run straight for Fiddler's Creek. John Henry swims better than anybody I know. He crawls like a catfish, blows bubbles like a swamp monster, but he doesn't swim in the town pool with me. He's not allowed. So we dam the creek with rocks and sticks to make a swimming spot, then holler and jump in, wearing only our skin. John Henry's skin is the color of browned butter. He smells like pine needles after a good rain. My skin is the color of the pale moths that dance around the porch light at night. John Henry says I smell like a just washed sock. "This means war," I shout. We churn that water into a white hurricane and laugh until our sides hurt. Then we float on our backs and spout like whales. "I'm going to be a fireman when I grow up," I say. "Me too," says John Henry. I have 2 nickels for ice pops, so we put on our clothes and walk to town. John Henry doesn't come with me through the front door of Mr. Mason's general store. He's not allowed. "How you doing, young Joe?" asks Mr. Mason. He winks and says, "You going to eat those all by yourself?" My heart does a quick beat. "I got one for a friend," I say, and scoot out the door. "Yes, sir, it's mighty hot out there," Mr. Mason calls after me. "I love ice pops," says John Henry. "Me too," I say. Annie Mae makes dinner for my family every night. She creams the corn and rolls the biscuits. Daddy stirs his iced tea and says, "The town pool opens tomorrow to everybody under the sun, no matter what color." That's the new law, Mama tells me. She helps my plate with peas and says, "It's the way it's going to be now. Everybody together. Lunch counters, restrooms, drinking fountains too." I wiggle in my chair like a doodlebug. "I gotta be excused," I shout, and I run into the kitchen to tell John Henry. "I'm going to swim in the town pool," he hollers. "Is it deep?" "Real deep," I tell him. "And the water's so clear you can jump to the bottom and open your eyes and still see." "Let's be the first one there," says John Henry. "I'll bring my good luck nickel and we can dive for it." Next morning, as the sun peeks into the sky, here comes my best friend, John Henry Waddell. Running to meet me. "Let's go," he yells. I got my nickel, and I run right with him, all the way to the town swimming pool. We race each other over the last hill, and we stop. County dump trucks are here. They grind and back up the empty pool. Workers rake steaming asphalt into the hole where sparkling clean water used to be. One of them is John Henry's big brother, Will Rogers. We start to call to him, "What happened?" But he sees us first and points back on down the road. It means, "Get on home." But our feet feel stuck. We can't budge. So we hunker in the tall weeds and watch all morning until the pool is filled with hot, spongy tar. Smoky steam rises in the air. Workers tie planks to their shoes and stomp on the blacktop to make it smooth. Will Rogers heaves his shovel into the back of an empty truck and climbs up with the other workers. His face is like a storm cloud, and I know this job has made him angry. "Let's go," a boss man shouts, and the trucks rumble slam down the road. It's so quiet now, we can hear the breeze whisper through the grass. We sit on the diving board and stare at the tops of the silver ladders that are sticking up from the tar. My heart beats hard in my chest. John Henry's voice shakes. "White folks don't want colored folks in their pool." "You're wrong, John Henry," I say, but I know he's right. "Let's get back to Fiddler's Creek," I say. I didn't want to swim in this old pool anyway. John Henry's eyes fill up with angry tears. "I did," he says. "I wanted to swim in this pool. I wanted to do everything you can do. I don't know what to say, but as I walk back to town, my head starts to pop with new ideas. I want to go to the dairy dip with John Henry, sit down and share root beer floats. I want us to go to the picture show, buy popcorn, and watch the movie together. And I want to see the town with John Henry's eyes." We stop in front of Mr. Mason's store. I jam my hands into my pockets while my mind searches for words to put with my new ideas. My fingers close around 2 nickels. "Want to get an ice pop?" John Henry wipes his eyes and takes a breath. I want to pick it out myself. I swallow hard, and my heart says yes. "Let's do that," I say. I give John Henry one of my nickels. He shakes his head. I got my own. We look at each other. Then we walk through the front door. Well, that's the book I wanted to share with you. And Catherine will help tell you what it means.
I will not.
That's a second grade book.
I don't know, maybe we should take a moment. I don't know if people have inferred that Carol Rasko won't be here. Unfortunately, she got sick, and she couldn't make the trip. So the implication of that is that we actually have a little more time. We could be a little more leisurely. So does anybody have any reactions to that book you'd like to utter before I go on to the boring and research-infused piece of this evening? Yeah, sure.
I would like to know how second graders respond to that. What kind of responses have you heard?
Well, there are probably 2 levels of response. One is a sort of non-verbal, just kind of a feeling response, because it's a powerful book, but they're very engaged with it. And for the kids who we've worked with that book, they have a lot of questions. On the literacy side, for example, they sometimes want to know what tar is, And on the social awareness side, they often kind of express some of their beginning thoughts and feelings about the relationship between different groups of people from different backgrounds. So they can pretty much engage with it. They don't this is, I guess one of the things that one could say about a book is that the reading level of the book is very appropriate for second graders. The thematic issues are appropriate for everybody. It's a book that you can read to 80-year-olds as well as 8-year-olds.
Okay, well, I guess that does connect to the sorts of things I'm going to talk about. I showed Bob.
But there's a question.
Oh, okay, go ahead.
I just have a comment.
Sure.
I have a lot of experience to bring to that book. I don't think young kids find that same level of experience. So in order to really use the book well, I think you have to find ways of enriching that.
Yeah, it's a good comment. Can I make a comment back?
Sure.
I appreciate that comment a lot. It reminds me, I'm glad you made it because it reminds me of something I would have wanted to say. I don't know, some of you may have attended these one-act plays at the American Repertory Theater. Many of you might not have. But there were 3 one-act plays about the transformation of people's lives with the ending of apartheid in South Africa. And one of the points that in the kind of conversations one has afterwards with people about these kind of moving, meaningful social transformations is, my gosh, these young kids there don't even know what apartheid was. And I said, well, but that's very similar to a book like this. One of the reasons that I like this book so much is not only is it about language and literacy and social awareness, but it's about history. So I really agree with you, but it is a way to start to engage kids in learning, not only about reading, but around social justice themes, but around history. So I think it's a very appropriate book for this time of year in many schools, both schools where kids are all white or all multicultural or different colors. So I agree with you, but it's not a reason to shy away from the book.
Okay, and it also connects very much to what I'm going to say. One of the points I will make, at least, is that it ain't just the book. It's what we do with the book that really makes a difference. So I showed the printout of this little brief PowerPoint presentation to Bob, and he said, "What does affordances mean?" So I will now explain to him.
Because you all know.
And you can overhear if you don't happen to know. Affordances is a term that derives from a field of psychology led by James Gibson. And it refers to the fact that different objects or events or visual displays make certain kinds of reactions easy or hard. So rattles, he was an infant researcher, rattles are designed in such a way that they're easy for infants to hold. They have holding affordances. And I think it's a nice term because there are certain things that it's really easy to do with books. These are not things that you can't do without books, but they're things that books make it easier to do, to introduce into children's lives. Now, I'm sure you all have had this, have experienced, as we all have, the standard reaction. What do you do? What do you do to help kids? What do you do when kids are into? What do you do? What is good parenting?
Can't be my wife because.
And the first response is always, "Oh, well, you should read books with kids." I mean, it's even one of those NBC spots, right? It's sort of the absolutely non-controversial notion about how good parenting occurs, about what should go on in good preschool programs, about what should go on in good early childhood settings. And there are lots of undertakings, lots of social campaigns that presuppose that prevention and intervention campaigns focused on improving school readiness or improving school performance need to have books at their center. This is a brief list. It's far from a comprehensive list. Reading is Fundamental was on there first because Carol Rasko was supposed to be here representing Reading is Fundamental. But basically what Reading is Fundamental does is it gives kids books. So Reach Out and Read similarly gives kids books and prescribes reading. Book Buddies and Into Books give kids books and create contexts for reading those books. So where these programs differ from one another is the degree of focus on the book versus the degree of focus on what you do with the book. And I'm going to argue that both of those pieces have to be there. Clearly, however young the child, it can make sense to promote book reading as an opportunity for warm, happy interactions. But what is there evidence for? Does book reading actually do anything besides cause people to sit down in each other's laps and have a good time together? Well, I think there is evidence. I won't go through every single one of these items, but there is evidence from this array of research literature about parent-child book reading that book reading has impacts on children's cognition, on their knowledge, that it has, perhaps the strongest evidence, that it has impact on their language, on vocabulary, on understanding of story structure and book language, that it has impacts on children's knowledge about print, what letters, what different letters are, but also sort of what you can do with print, and perhaps even up to the point of being able to recognize some very salient or high-frequency words. And after having just read Freedom Summer, I think you can understand that there's also lots of potential in reading books with children for affective or moral or social learnings to take place, that books often do have morals or lessons, explicit or implicit, that they promote the kind of perspective taking which is at the core of operating in a social world in a way that could be thought of as righteous. It also promotes sort of moral commitments to things like the value of reading and the value of knowing, which I think we shouldn't underestimate. So let me give you a little bit of data here about how these various kinds of lessons get transferred to kids. We have probably 5,000 readings by mothers with children of this book, The Very Hungry Caterpillar, across a variety of studies. Most of them produced by very low-income mothers with their children ranging in age from 2 to 5 or so. And so I'll show you a transcript from one 57-month-old child, Jamil, with his mother, who was a participant in an intervention program focused on adolescent high school dropout mothers. So the book reading went like this. You all know Very Hungry Caterpillar, I trust. This is sort of the middle of the book, but you won't have lost the plot too much. The child says he built a small house. The mother called a cocoon. Around himself. He stayed inside. All right, you get the point. Everything the mother says, the child repeats for more than 2 weeks. Then he nibbled a hole in the cocoon, pushed his way out, and he was a beautiful butterfly. All right, that's all reading the text, straight out of the book. Then the mother says, so what did the cocoon turn into? What do caterpillars turn to? The child said, butterflies. Right, what do they live in? Child, a butterfly house. This, pointing to the picture of the cocoon. What's that called? The child, a cocoon. A cocoon, right. Okay, so one vocabulary item, possibly acquired. For how long, we don't know. World knowledge, same study, a slightly younger child. What's that? Pointing to the picture of the sun. What is that? What make you hot? I don't know. Huh? What make you hot? The sun don't make you hot? Make you real hot. All right. A conversation, or very early in the book, where the sun is warming up the egg. In another study, we also gave, you haven't lost your eyesight, I just couldn't get a very good image here. Don't worry. We wanted to compare readings of narrative books and of information books because one of the things about affordances, it seemed, was that different kinds of books have different kinds of affordances, affordances for different kinds of learning. So we selected what turned out to be an extremely boring book about elephants, which some of the mother-child pairs persisted in reading. So here's a conversation with an almost 6-year-old child, the middle of reading this book. Mother says, "That's a tusk. See, it's white. You know what, Domingo? Hunters kill these elephants for that. Why? Because they want it for, well, they use it for different things. I think some museums buy them, and I don't know about museums, but I know that they kill for this white thing." And the child says, "There's no tusk on these elephants, though," pointing to a different picture. Mother, "See, that one's bigger, so some of them die because of that. That is sad." Child, "I wish there was not such things as hunters and guns." Mother, "I know it, me too. Oh, there's a herd. That's a lot of them. See how they walk? Ma, here's one that's dead." "I don't think he's dead." "Well, we'll find out. They use their tusks to dig." "Oh, see, he's digging a hole. They use their tusks to dig for salt." Let's look and see if there's another page you might like. It's ivory. The tusks are made of ivory, and they can make things with these tusks, and that's why some animals, they die. The hunters kill them. No wonder why they have hunters. Yeah, that's sad. I'm never going to be a hunter when I grow up. Oh, thank God, I'm glad. All right, a pretty good mix here of world knowledge, not world knowledge that you will note the mother did not have until she used the book to scaffold it. She wasn't quite sure why elephants were killed for tusks. She wasn't quite sure about the ivory connection. But also these moral themes that emerge in the context of the affordances offered by this particular book. Well, clearly those affordances have to do with those affordances vary as a function of many different features. The book type, informational versus narrative books, give you different opportunities. Alphabet or dictionary style books lead to certain kinds of opportunities for learning, but not for others. Rhyming, Dr. Seuss style books are good for some things, but not for all things. But they also, the affordances vary very much as a function of the preferred cultural or individual style. And in the typical middle class style of book reading is a style with preschool age children is a style in which the text is actually quite a minimal part of the interaction. It's really the conversation about the text. The text might not even all be read, or it might be read, but really the learning is going on in the discussion, not in the reading. But there are performative style readers, dramatic readers, Bob, for example. There are recitation readers, like Jamil's mother. I say it, you say it, I say it, you say it, I say it, you say it. There are closed style readers. We could probably do this one with the group of people in this room. I sat there with Sally, we sat there, we... All right, well, that's good enough. It's actually two. But where a book that's been read many, many times, kids can fill in the final word in a line. And then there is, very powerfully in some contexts, the comprehension-focused readers. The readers the adults who are structuring this not as being about this text, but as being about the process of comprehending text in general. And those in our research are the ones whose children make the greatest gains as a function of the frequency of book reading. So let me just tell you 6 interesting things about book reading. All of them could be elaborately documented, but there's social class differences in the way parents talk to kids. And one of the big social class differences is that middle class parents talk more than working class parents, but not when they're reading books. When they're reading books, the social class differences diminish. So this is one of the affordances of book reading that's very powerful, that putting books in the hands, even of families which are not normally very talkative, creates context when talk is likely to be much more dense. Secondly, book reading is a key context for joint attention talk. Joint attention talk where the adult and the child are focused on the same topic. And that is the kind of talk that best promotes language development. It's much easier. Once again, this is one of those affordances. It's much easier to do that where you're sitting on my lap and we've got this book in front of us and there's only one picture on the page. That is a primary context for joint attention, as opposed to talk during dinner or talk with a pile of toys on the floor, where the establishment of a joint focus of attention is much more problematic. Everybody talks more while reading books, more per minute while reading books than while doing other things. So the density of talk during the number of words per minute during book reading is in the typical dyadic setting 2 to 3 times higher than during play with toys, during caretaking activities, during meal times. So if part of what kids need is just exposure to lots of talk, book reading is going to promote that over other kinds of interactions. Much of the value of book reading is carried by the talk, not the text. This is not to say that the text is irrelevant. Sometimes the text is a source of the knowledge. Sometimes it's a source of the topic. Sometimes it's important to read the text before you have the talk. But in preschools, in kindergartens, and in families, the children who are exposed mostly to reading learn much less than the kids who are exposed to reading and talking about the book. Rereading books is key in promoting vocabulary and other kinds of learning. In other words, the thinking about how parents interact, or parents or preschool teachers or other adults interact around books is very important. And encouraging people to go to the library can be great, but actually owning some books is also really crucial for kids, because going back to the same book over and over and over again is a key part of creating the affordances for learning through books. And then finally, as I've already demonstrated a little bit, styles of book reading vary enormously across mother-child pairs. And we have to assume, although nobody has studied this systematically, that the different styles of book reading are associated with different beliefs about what literacy consists of and different outcomes. Is literacy being defined by those styles of book reading as strict adherence to the text, or is it being defined as interpretation and elaboration of the text? Two very different approaches. Whoops, that was supposed to get killed. All right. All right, so I've said book reading has all these affordances and all of these consequences. What does it affect? Well, immediate outcomes, short-term outcomes, for which we have evidence are language skills, children's language skills, children's interest in books, so this is a kind of a self-feeding system, and emergent literacy skills. Later literacy outcomes include vocabulary, interest in reading, motivation to read, and reading comprehension skills. Why reading comprehension skills? Perhaps because of the focus on comprehension as part of the talk around text, but also because vocabulary and world knowledge that is acquired during book reading by preschoolers feed into the system that supports reading comprehension in third graders, fourth graders, and fifth graders. What kind of studies do we have that we could use to convince people that book reading has these effects? The vast majority, I'll have to admit, are correlational. That families that do more of this kind of book reading have kids with more of that kind of language skill or that kind of emergent literacy skill. And those studies are a little bit shaky because there are big social class differences in frequency of book reading and in many other factors that influence children's developmental outcomes. There are also, it's now well demonstrated, issues having to do with children's preferences. It turns out that kids who, at the age of 7 or 8, are going to get identified as reading, as kids who are problematic readers, who are dyslexic, who have language impairments, already by the age of 3 don't want to be read to. They sort of know this isn't their thing, and they refuse to participate in the reading interactions as frequently as other kids who will end up not having language problems. So this is the kind of data that suggests that we can't necessarily identify one-way cause and effect relationships from book reading to child outcomes. Nonetheless, there have been a couple of meta-analyses, and there have been some experimental studies showing powerful effects of book reading on child outcomes. the meta-analyses studies across a whole array of book reading, of correlational studies of book reading. Both of these, which were done at about the same time and were published and review largely the same literature, it's not surprising that they come out with about the same estimates of significant effects of book reading on children's language skills in particular. But then there have been proper experimental studies where groups of kids are exposed to styles of book reading that their parents are taught to engage in. Parents are actually trained to engage in richer and more elaborated interactions around books. And those kids end up with accelerated language development as a result of exposure to. So the first impressive finding here is that you can in a couple of hours teach people how to read books in ways that are better, more interesting, more productive, more elaborated, more engaging for kids, and that if you do that, the kids then also have show the effects of that kind of book reading. So I think, and then there's another kind of experimental study, by the way. They're both in preschool and in elementary school settings. There have been book flood studies where you just flood a preschool classroom with hundreds of books and don't focus too much on what kids should do, on what teachers should do with the books, but ensure that the children have access to the books. And what happens is the kids demand to be read to in settings like that because there are so many attractive books around. Ellie's work is with second language speakers of English, and he's shown massively better outcomes with 8 to 10-year-olds in classrooms where English is the medium of instruction, but there are no native speakers of English around if there are lots and lots of attractive books in English available in the classroom. So I think we have a pretty strong basis for making an argument to those who might be funding studies like or programs like Reading is Fundamental or Reach Out and Read or Book Buddies, that this is a very productive thing to do. So let me leave you with a poster from 1920 from the literacy campaign conducted in the Soviet Union shortly after the revolution there. A 5-year literacy campaign that had a massive effect on literacy rates in Russia. And this was one of many posters that argued that for the importance of reading and the necessity of exposing kids to the conditions that would ensure the successful acquisition of reading. Thank you.
Is there any burning question, though? I guess yeah.
Well, that's a great question. And of course, you'd have to answer it with regard to specific skill level of the child. But there are clearly going to be different consequences of getting the child to read and reading to the child. And one of the things that I see happening in No Child Left Behind influenced classrooms is much more focus on having kids read and less time being reserved for reading to kids. The value of reading to kids is you can read to them things that they can't read for themselves, the things that actually give access to the vocabulary, to the world knowledge, to the social themes that they might not be able to access. I mean, Freedom Summer would be a tough read for a second grader, actually. It would have to be a pretty good second grade reader who could make it through that on his or her own. But nonetheless, a combination of reading it and having it read to one would give access to conversation and discussion and opportunities for learning that shouldn't be eliminated whether or not the child can read on his own. So I would have to say there has to be a mix here, and however desperate we are to get kids to read themselves, we shouldn't use that as an excuse to withhold from them the enrichment possibilities associated with reading to them. Yeah.
There's one thing that you didn't mention, which seems to me is really important and doesn't happen as much anymore, and it's just storytelling without it.
Mm-hmm.
Just as you sing or should be singing to a child, telling stories and reciting poetry is a wonderful free introduction.
Mm-hmm.
And develops all kinds of
I imagine, I don't think the database, the research base is as strong. I mean, certainly you can imagine that many of the features of book reading are also there in singing and poetry and storytelling. But the difference is that books scaffold the adult performance. And I think that's an important thing to remember, that books create the context and help the adult do a better job of the kind of talking. If adults are great storytellers, I'm sure that would have a positive impact on the kids that they can interact with. I'm going to tell you something very embarrassing right now. When my son was born, my husband said to me, "But Catherine, you have to promise never to sing to him." So singing and storytelling there is more variability across individuals in the capacity to do that in a way that's productive, I think, than book reading, because the book really does scaffold optimal forms of interaction. If you can carry a tune, you should definitely sing to your kid too.
I think it was more part of our culture in the past, and I think that's how people became, by listening to stories
Mm-hmm.
from grandmothers and people who didn't really know what to do,
Mm-hmm.
created a literacy base.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Some other comments?
I have one question.
Yeah.
Can you develop bad habits of reading to kids?
Yeah. You sure can. I mean, like, you can tell them to shut up, for example. Right? I mean, you can insist that they repeat everything you say, which I think is, if they want to do it, fine. But if it's something they're doing under the insistence of the adult, it's probably not. You can develop bad habits by pushing this as a context for teaching reading rather than as a context for talking about the book. Absolutely.
You talked about how with children who have reading disabilities later in life show signs earlier in age of sort of not wanting to be read to.
Mm-hmm.
If you're like a parent and you have a child who doesn't really want to be read to, how much do you push that?
Well, that's a great question, I think, because and we don't really know what the mechanism is here, right? I mean, except that this is just not the kind of interaction that these kids find engaging. I have no knowledge base for answering that question. I don't really know, but it does, to some extent. I guess this would be my answer. Book reading is, I think, very sort of well-constructed piece of parent-child interaction because of the affordances, because it makes certain kinds of interaction easy. But it isn't the only way to have those kinds of powerful interactions. So I think if you've got a kid who won't sit down and read a book with you, then the solution is to figure out how to have those kinds of interactions in other contexts. Now, I must say, I have a young friend, who now not so young, but when she was little, she would not sit and be read to. And her mother would kind of sort of hold the book up and read to her from across the room, and the kid would be whirring around the room and doing, and I sort of said, hey, this isn't her thing. Don't do this, because for one thing, you can't read a book to a kid who's 20 feet away from the book. That's ridiculous. The whole point of it is focused attention, But there are other ways to engage in kind of focused attention without having the object there. It's just harder. That the thing about books is it makes it so easy.
Can you hold your questions and come back later?
Come back after Lisa.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a great
Yeah.
idea.
Okay.
Okay. Well, as Bob told you in his introduction, I'm one of the staff members at Cambridge School Volunteers. And for those of you who don't know, we are the organization responsible for monitoring and encouraging volunteerism in the Cambridge Public Schools. And we're about to celebrate our 40th anniversary in 2006. And in any one year nowadays, we have about 1,000 volunteers working in the Cambridge Public Schools who either are placed by us or who are affiliated with us in some way. So the Cambridge Public Schools are very fortunate to have such a generous community here in Cambridge. I'm delighted to talk about the Reading Buddies program. Pull this out here. Because this deceptively simple program is was such a success from the very first day that we started our first program. It's popular with students, with volunteers, with teachers, and we have, you see here, one of the Ed School volunteers from 2 years ago reading at the Longfellow School. And one of the reasons that this program has been so successful is that our collaborators care so much about education and kids that they've been willing to provide the financing and the in-kind help that we need to really support excellent programs. And I've listed our Reading Buddies collaboratives in chronological order. Our oldest program, 7 years old, is the Volpe National Transportation Systems Center program. They piloted the Reading Buddies program at the Kennedy School. It was actually the idea of a teacher there, and we all got together and developed it. Volpe wanted something that would attract a lot of volunteers and be easy for them to do, and this has certainly proven to be a great success. They have 44 volunteers right now. They've had as many as 80. They have adults paired with every student in the second and third grades at the Kennedy Longfellow School, and we look forward to many, many more years with Volpe at the Kennedy Longfellow. Our second oldest program, which is represented here tonight by their coordinator, Ashley East, right there, if you want to speak with her after, is our Genzyme program. Genzyme is paired with the Fletcher Maynard Academy. They have 50 volunteers this year, paired with each and every first and second grader at the Fletcher Maynard Academy. Genzyme provides a lot of support for this program in terms of coordination, books, and even transportation for their volunteers. They moved their headquarters just far enough away that it was too far to walk to the Fletcher Maynard, so they liked the program so much that they agreed to fund transportation starting last year, and so that's unfortunately very expensive, and we're very grateful to Genzyme for taking that extra step to keep the program going. Our newest program, but it's becoming a veteran program too, is the Harvard Graduate School of Education program. Roger Dempsey here from the Office of School Partnerships is the person who came to us asking to develop a program like this. And I'm going to focus in on it more shortly, so I won't say anything more about it now, except that it's paired with the Amigos School on Putnam Ave. Working with the Graduate School of Ed are a few volunteers from Book Pals, which is a national program of the Screen Actors Guild. The PALS part of this name stands for Performing Artists for Literacy in Schools. And normally, Book Pals read to entire classrooms. They're all actors or directors who are volunteering their time. And we're fortunate enough to have each year a few volunteers from Book Pals joining us in the Ed School program.
I will just comment that a limiting factor in expanding Reading Buddies programs is geography. The businesses need to be close enough to the schools for the volunteers to walk to the school easily. Or the companies, corporations, universities have to fund transportation, which, as I said, is very expensive. So we have schools who would like to have buddies programs in Cambridge, but unfortunately they're not very close to any businesses. So something we're always working on. Our Cambridge School Volunteer Reading Buddies model targets grades 1, 2, or 3, and sometimes 2 grades, which allows for the possibility that a pairing will stay together for 2 years, which is wonderful. When that can happen, it's just the best of all worlds. Every child in the grade has a buddy. It's not a pull-out program, so it's embedded in the school day, in the literacy block usually, and there's a whole wonderful ambience that comes from the fact that the whole class is doing this at the same time. It's lovely. Our buddies read to the students 30 minutes a day, weekly or bi-weekly, depending on the situation in the school. They all come as a group. At the same time, they read in the classroom and other settings, such as the library. They spread out if necessary, and they leave as a group. So there's quite a sense of camaraderie that develops among the volunteers as a team, which is wonderful too. In our program, the adults do the reading. It's not a shared reading program. We require that all the volunteers have come to pre-service training to enrich the reading aloud experience. We know that shared reading requires a lot more training than our initial pre-service training. We also just believe in the many benefits of reading aloud. Every program has a dedicated book collection, which is donated by our partner companies, and by Harvard in this case. The collection is usually selected by teachers in the school. We have very rich, diverse collections. We have nonfiction, fiction, poetry, and lots of multicultural books. Wonderful, rich collections for the children to choose from. And these are kept in crates. They're brought out for the reading session. They're spread out in the library or wherever we choose as a convenient spot. And during the session, the adults and the students can come to the collection and choose books as they finish books and choose them for this next time. The children do like to read sometimes. So we do schedule a couple of days when, with the teacher's help, the children choose books to read to their buddies. And this sort of calms some of the students would really like to do the reading. And also some of the adults feel that they're not really helping unless they're helping the kids to do the reading. So we want the adults to do the reading, but we give the kids a chance to show off their skills. A lovely element of all of our programs is that the children receive a gift book at the end of the year. In the case of the Harvard program, we're able to give them 2 books at 2 different times, before the winter holidays and then at the end of the year. And believe me, these books, they're just paperback books, are treasured mementos of the Reading Buddies experience, and the fact that they can take them home and keep them is really important to the kids. And I love to tell this story. It's about a Genzyme student who, at the picnic which Genzyme sponsored at the end of the year for the students, the children were all opening their books. We wrapped them, so there's this anticipation factor. And this one little boy opened his book, and he looked up at the sky, and he said, "Thank you, Jesus, it's my favorite book." And that's pretty typical of how the kids feel about these books. I want to focus in for a moment on the Harvard program, the Ed School program. It's sponsored by the Staff Advisory Committee to the Dean of Administration and by the Office of School Partnerships. The program's located at the Amigos School on Putnam Ave, and the Amigos School is, as most of you probably know, a Spanish-English dual immersion school, which means the children spend alternate weeks in English and Spanish. And the Buddies program is part of their English week, and the kids know that, they count on it, they know that when they have English, they also have buddies, so that's terrific. This year we have a total of 30 volunteers. 27 are from the ed school, they're staff members and grad students, and we have 3 book pals, and they read to every single second grader from 2 homerooms, 30 minutes a day, every other week. The program is coordinated collaboratively by Cambridge School volunteers and the ed school. We participate in program development, in volunteer screening, in coordinating training. We hire teachers to do the training with us for the volunteers. We provide overall support during the year for the program, and then at the end of the year we conduct an evaluation process and we recognize the volunteers. On the Harvard side, each year Roger hires 2 interns, and they are always unbelievably wonderful. They've enriched the program so much. This year, Cecily Feltham and Aaron Renner are our interns. They're responsible for recruitment in September, for pairing the students and the adults. They get some help from the teacher, but basically they do the pairing. They're on site every day that the volunteers are in the school, and one of the most important things they do is make sure that there's substitutes if any of the volunteers can't be there. The kids are pretty devastated if everybody gets paired up and their buddy hasn't arrived. So we put a lot of emphasis on having some substitutes, alternates, and we have 4 or 5 from Harvard and in all of our programs. And Cecily and Aaron just work very hard to smooth over any little bumps there in the road when somebody can't make it at the last minute. They're responsible for the year-end event, for purchasing the books, for the program, and for the gift books, so they do a lot to help our program. We couldn't do it without them. I mentioned that we require that all of our Buddies volunteers attend a pre-service training, and I just wanted to share some of our topics with you. We talk a lot about the benefits of reading aloud, in part because, as I mentioned before, some of our volunteers tend to think that reading aloud isn't powerful in itself. So we talk about all the benefits you've already heard about from Catherine, especially the importance of reading with expression and fluency and all of the wonderful vocabulary and world knowledge that can be increased through reading. We ask our volunteers to spend a few minutes previewing the book they're going to read with the child. They arrive a few minutes early. We talk about taking a few minutes to identify some stopping spots, to maybe flag some words they're going to talk about. Just get ready to read that book. They don't have much time to do it, but they do try to take a look. We talk about conversation before, during, and after the reading session. We talk about that being a real conversation and not a question and answer kind of session. We tell them that it should sound like 2 friends talking together, and that, believe me, that's what I see. That's what's going on in these programs. We have a bright orange tip sheet, survival sheet for strategies for those volunteers who have the easily distractible child, maybe one of these children that Catherine mentioned who doesn't particularly like to be read to. And those strategies range from sitting close to the teacher, to allowing the child to draw, to stopping to ask the child to make predictions, to just being very clear about why you're there, that we're here to read, not to play, whatever. And for the most part, I think that the tools that we give them are adequate. And most of the children absolutely love Reading Buddies. We go over CSV has some general guidelines around confidentiality, sharing information about the child only with the teacher, not with other volunteers, not with parents, but with the teacher. In the school setting, we don't have the children sitting in the laps as you do in the preschool setting, and we talk about that because some children do tend to want to climb into the lap, and we kind of role play how have the child sit next, make it clear that I want you to sit right next to me. We're going to have the book right between us. And that always takes care of any problems with that, with sitting in the laps. And finally, this is a school-based program. It's safe within the school, within the classroom, so we do ask volunteers not to contact students outside of school, of course. I've included these pictures of Bill Hollinger, who was a volunteer for 3 years with the Harvard program, because they really capture the essence of a buddy session. You can see that the boy is engaged, that Bill is doing the reading, and you can see they're laughing and talking about the book together. It's just, this is how it should look, and this is really what I see every day during Reading Buddies. At the end of the year, we conduct an evaluation process. We solicit feedback from teachers, volunteers, and students. And I wanted to share some of the comments that we've received with you. Teachers are very loyal to this program. They sometimes have to make some special arrangements to have it happen in their classroom, and they're more than happy to do that. They have to be present during the session to help out. Teachers recognize all the literacy benefits, and they also recognize the importance of kids having relationships with adults outside of who are from the outside world. And I love the last comment, too. Catherine has talked about this. Children can enjoy reading in the Buddies program regardless of their reading ability. The students are 100% enthusiastic about this program every year. It's just amazing. And you can see from the range of comments on the slide that they recognize the literacy benefits, they think it's fun, they know they're learning things, and they also like meeting a new friend and meeting a new person, and they are able to articulate that even at the second grade level. And I love the final comment. They had to do all the work. Why did you like what did you like about the reading program? Reading Buddies program, the answer was they had to do all the work. Well, this is probably a struggling reader for whom reading is work. So it was a pleasure for him or her to be read too. And finally, the volunteers are also enormously enthusiastic about this program. It's easy for them to do. They feel they're making a difference. The children are so excited about the buddies coming, so it's obvious that the children love the program. Just today I got an email from a teacher who said her students were devastated by the snow day yesterday because they missed the Volpe program. And of course they missed your program too. They really look forward to Reading Buddies, and it's obvious to the adults that they do. When I walk into a school, they're not sure who I am. They know I'm sort of a reading buddy, but not. So they see me and they go, Reading Buddies. And they all start moving around in the classroom, and the teacher has to settle them down. And I say, no, they're not quite here yet, or whatever. It's amazing. So I think I'll stop here and turn things over to you, Bob. Thank you very much.
You know, I've been kind of looking out at the audience and wondering who you are. You know, other than the book that you're going to get when you walk out the door, why have you come? You know, are you involved in this program? Do you want to learn about it? I wonder if people could just sort of share what their experience is around reading to kids or reading out loud. Anybody want to? Yeah. We even have a microphone. Yeah, but if you walk up to that microphone, we really can hear you, I think. I know, it's kind of scary, but...
Well, no, not really.
Okay.
Well, I wanted to see the CEO for reading is fundamental, because everything people have said, I've experienced it. When I was a child, my dad would read to me, and when he asked me, what is this or something, I will just forget, and it scares me. And I didn't want to read. Any day he'll go out, I'll be so happy that he's not around, so I won't read. So, but the thing about it is that through the years, I ended up, reading is my love. I love to read, and I love to see children read. And while I've worked with children, they really love to do it. And not only that, they learn to write and make books. Unfortunately, I don't have any book. Children have, reading. And some of them, they've written so much that it was dramatized and aired in the television. This is a 4-year-old, 4th grade child. Now, about music, what you mentioned. Music, people learn from music. Remember Sesame Street? It's form of music and other forms of music. Subconsciously, you hear music, you see yourself, singing it. That's learning. And secondly, about reading early. Jim Trelease, in his Read Aloud book, said that reading early fosters creativity, and that if you don't stimulate it at that early age, later on in life, when you need creativity and innovation, you can find it. So I really enjoyed coming back. It's interesting. I didn't plan to stay, but something happened and I stayed up and I enjoyed every bit of it. Thank you.
Yes.
I'm interested in, this is a question for Dr. Snow, and these children read at 2 and 3 and read with perfect intonation and inflection, but they lack the reading comprehension. And they can read like adult level books at age 3. And I'm wondering if there's any current research that looks at, how do they acquire the perfect intonation pattern and meaning and yet miss the overall gestalt of the book? Like that little book, I had a horrible, terrible, awful day. For example, the last line is, well, that's just how some days are. Or some days are like that. And they will read the whole book perfectly. This little boy I saw from Israel named Yonatan, he read the whole book, and I was just positive he got the story. And he read the last line, some days are just like that. And yet, if I asked him about the moral of the story, what it was about, he couldn't begin to tell me. Is that reading, or what can I do as a practitioner to help his comprehension? That's why I'm here.
Gee, you sat here the whole evening for that? Should get an answer? Because I don't know. Yonata, do you have a response to that? Yonata is an expert on autism. I am not by any means.
No. This is a group of, many of them can read but really miss the abstract. Yes. It does carry over in social interactions. I'm just wondering. Well, there's a group of children on the spectrum called Asperger's disorder, and they in particular really have this ability to read with an interesting intonation pattern that makes you feel like they understand everything they're reading, and yet they miss. Right. Some of them do understand what they're reading. I was just wondering if there's any research that would help me in my work with these kids to increase their comprehension or in the book reading with them.
Yeah. I mean, I think, as Yonata says, if the basic disability is defined as a disability of social understanding, of social perspective, then if you can confirm that information texts at the same complexity that they actually process those and show comprehension. That the difficulty is in comprehending these texts that have social content, then clearly the intervention is an intervention focused on the social understanding and not focused on reading, right? So it's a problem of identifying the limits around the nature of the problem, and whether it's worse in reading than in conversation or in oral language. That's an interesting question. I don't happen to know research focused on that particular problem, but the first step is to actually define what the limits of the problem are and whether it's specific to reading or more general than reading.
But I'm glad you helped clarify something I said, which wasn't quite right, about that the kids can read the book. What they can do is what second graders can do is appreciate sitting there and being read to. And I guess what you're hearing is we don't have the answer, but it would be interesting to see if there was research around what the effects of reading to a child with, say, high-level autism and Asperger's child would actually be like to help facilitate their social understanding, because it would fit in with Catherine's notion of affordances being, that would be a better affordance for a young child who has social interaction and interpretation difficulties. So it sounds like I don't mean this facetiously, I mean it seriously. It sounds like we either need to look and find out whether there's research on this or it should be done.
Yeah, but thank you. No, it did help me to listen to what Catherine was saying. Thanks a lot.
Yeah, you're welcome. Yeah.
Hi. I was very fortunate to have a mom who's a teacher and the best book reader in the world, and so my love affair with reading began really, really, really young and asking for more books and more and more and more. And I was a reading volunteer in high school for kids with reading difficulties, and that was challenging because I loved it and they hated it because they hated to read. And that program encouraged them to read a lot, and we actually kind of forced them in a sense, and that was hard. But more recently, I was teaching in Africa, and my students were middle schoolers, and they couldn't read, they couldn't write, they couldn't speak English, and that was the language of instruction. And so I kept thinking about it, and I was like, we need a library, we need a library. There are some books thrown around, but we managed to get some books, and we actually built 2 libraries at the elementary and the middle school. And then I realized that wasn't good enough, and so we ended up developing my second year a way where we'd actually bring all of the elementary school kids in with their classes by the teachers, and I would read the book in English, and then their teacher would read the book in the local language, because I wanted them to understand the book and to start to get enthralled by it, because if they don't understand the language, then it's like the rest of the day, which isn't a language that they don't speak. But yet, I also wanted them to hear the English, but I've never had training in ESL kind of things, and so it was just, and I didn't have any access to the internet or anything. I was really way out in the middle of nowhere. So I would like to have kind of people's opinions about what you should do, especially in the context of, I know this is related not to most people, but in Africa, because the thing was that all of the books were donated from the West. They had things like washing machines and stuff in them that the kids were like, So before reading a book, I would actually have to look and look and look for a book that actually applied to the kids, because most of them were totally irrelevant. It's really frustrating because there are all these donation schemes going to Africa, and I'm sure to Latin America and all over the developing world, but we just give our books that are really great for our kids, but they're horrible for those kids. They have no context for that. And so it's very frustrating. And then there's the added problem of all the books that they have are in a language that is not their mother tongue, and it's an impossible thing to get over because there are 2,000 languages on the continent of Africa, and so I mean, it's financially not very feasible, but I was just wondering if people had ideas for what to do and how to approach it. And
yeah, thank you. Do you have an idea? Oh,
wait. Here we have an idea
from Africa.
Yeah.
Okay.
Thank you. I'm from Nigeria. I'll ask you, which country and where's the location? Is it in the village, in the city, Or where? In the Gambia, okay. Well, I am from Nigeria. The children I've worked with, some of them, they speak English in their homes. So it's easy. Then some, they don't, because why I said English is this. Sometimes the ethnic group of both parents is not the same, so they end up speaking English. It's our lingua franca. Now there's a boy, he's a son of, at home, they spoke strictly their language, which is Hausa. The dad is late. He's the Air Vice Marshal of Nigeria as of, I think, 80s or so, right? But the son was in our school, and he didn't know English at all. He speaks his Hausa. The boy came within a year. He started speaking English. I didn't learn any skill concerning teaching English as a second language. I grew up learning it in school. I also studied early childhood education, so I have a background in that, and to expose children to literature. In terms of books being donated and things like that, depending on how the book was selected, see, I have an eye for books that is relevant, but not also relevant, but from other cultures, so that they will get to know and appreciate other cultures and learn. Even if they have those things they can't relate to it, yes, it's somewhere here, and they see the television, it's here, and it sticks. So I don't have any bias on it. But also, you can also develop literature from the country, depending on their folk tale, and that they can also relate, because most folk tales in Africa has a moral, value. Actually, it gives me an idea this is one from Nigeria. It's a folk tale from Nigeria, and it's it will be available in the stores if you want to buy some and donate to Gambia. However, don't shy away from books outside. It's also introducing them to other aspects of other culture, but not to at the expense of their culture.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks a lot. Do you have?
But no, I don't. I think we should get the audience.
Okay.
Well, mine was an idea and a question about that in developing countries. I'm from Central America, and actually we're taking a class in inequalities in Latin America. And one of the things we were discussing was that definitely the developmental process at home is very important for what a child brings to the school. And one thing that we were talking about is the fact that many parents of very low-income families in Central America sometimes don't even talk to their children. And so one possibility that is both a thing to do and a question too, because I don't know how you do it, is how do you make parents read more? Because if they're not even talking a lot to their small children, how can you make them I know it's both an issue of bringing the resources, the books, but also it's a more cultural thing. How do you get them? What's the way of reaching them and trying to make them interact more with their children? How to use books for that?
Mm-hmm. Well, I'm clearly the response to that has got to be a local response, because it's going to be quite different even within Central America, and different as a function of school and culture and resources and so forth. But for example, we have had considerable success in Costa Rica in schools serving relatively poor children, implementing a program for kindergartners where parents were invited, family members, not just parents, but everybody came. Family members were invited to actually be instructed in how to interact with kids around books. And then books were sent home by the kindergarten teacher as homework. So it was a homework assignment, but the homework assignment involved the parent or the adult who had a session of training, fairly didactic training actually, in how to use these materials to promote children's literacy development. This is a program that has been fairly widely disseminated in U.S. contexts, and I sort of said to myself, is this a good idea to even try this? Is it going to take hold at all? It's turned out to be enormously popular among families who have the sense that they want to help their kids succeed in school, of course, that's a fairly universal commitment, but that this is sufficiently structured way to do that, that they actually get involved in doing it. Now, the question is, does it increase the likelihoods of talking or reading books outside this planned session? I don't know. That would be a very valuable thing to find out.
Lisa, do you have any approximation of this?
I don't
In
think
terms of
so.
bilingual issues?
Well, we, of course, have children in all of our programs for whom English is not a first language. And the Amigos program, which is obviously half of the that's a key feature. Half of the students have Spanish as their first language, half have English. Since we operate during the English week, we read in English, and that's very much encouraged by the teachers. So we haven't gotten into reading in Spanish, although we've certainly had volunteers interested in doing that. And it's pretty important to kids to read in their native language and be read to.
Thanks. Yeah.
I was just going to comment and give you an idea too. I was actually teaching in Texas, and I had plenty of books, but I was teaching hearing impaired kids, and I found that one thing that really motivated them was for you to have a combined experience, and then they could draw a picture about it, and I would write a sentence, and they would take and just staple it together, create their own little book, and they would take turns taking it home. Or I would photocopy it, because in this case I had the technology, or use digital cameras and things like that, and you create your own books, and they're relevant to the kids, and the kids have ownership of it, so they feel like it's a lot more important to them, and they also have much more ease using their level language, because in my class, some of my kids were using 5-6 words, and some were barely detecting sounds, so they could at least make the sound of the dog that we saw down the street, and things like that, so they could really adapt. But I also had a question. I remember wanting to learn to read because I always saw my parents reading. And so I always wanted to be part of them sitting on the couch and both of them were reading. And so I was wondering if there's systematic research about the impact of parents reading for leisure and not just reading to the kids, and how that combines.
Well, yeah, there is. Once again, it's correlational research, but it's very clear that one of the demographic factors that predicts successful accomplishment of learning how to read is parents who read more, parents with more books in the home, parents with more, subscriptions to newspapers and magazines and things like that. So definitely there is an association between seeing people read. And in fact, there's even in one recent study an association for Latino kids in the U.S. Between boys' reading achievement. This is work by, I think Claude Goldenberg actually reported this. The reading accomplishment of boys in the primary grades and the amount of reading that their fathers were required to do as part of their work. So fathers whose jobs involved reading forms, reading addresses, reading, had boys who were more successful in learning how to read.
Yes, all right, make this your last question. Go ahead.
I work for Read Boston, and I'm working in the preschooling programming with teachers trying to get them to do interactive reading in their classrooms. And so I've been trying to give them information and statistics, but I was looking at, you're showing us some of the research, but the dating on that is all late 80s, early 90s, and I was wondering if there's anything more recent, like any more recent studies.
It doesn't stop being true just because it was done 15 years ago. Yeah, no, there are a lot of new findings. I mean, I basically, quite frankly, did the very easy thing of pulling things off my own CV to annotate that. But there's a book out quite recently, edited by Stahl, Van Cleek, and somebody or other, about book reading, all about book reading, and there's much more recent work by David Dickinson in combination with various other people, precisely about optimal styles of book reading in group care settings, in daycare and preschool settings, that would be really valuable.
Well, I want to thank Lisa and Catherine for sharing their research and their practice with you and with me, and thank you for coming and participating with us. And I guess now we should adjourn and go get a book.